from the Gestapo and SS in front of our apartment house. We had an apartment there. And we decided, carrying this letter, we better wait here and see what our mother tells us when they leave. So we waited there in the corner and we watched all this, and to our surprise, they came out and with my mother, put my mother in one of the Gestapo cars and took her away.
You experienced the Holocaust. It's hard for us to believe that there are people alive today who have lived through that hell and are living through what we're seeing now with October 7th and the satanic evil of those who hate the Jews, who want to kill the Jews, and it is satanic. I want to ask you, what was it like, in the best of your own words, and I know you say it in the book, but to be a Jew in Hitler's Germany? What part of Germany did you live in, and how did this manifest itself in your childhood?
Yeah, originally, actually, my family is from Austria. My father is from Vienna. He was Catholic, and he married my mother, who is Jewish and lived in Germany. So I met my mother actually as the most of the time that I spent with her, except the first 3 or 4 years we spent in Germany.
So, of course, you know, we have to, if there are young people listening and they don't understand, the Nazis were the definition of racists. They don't care what you believe. They only cared about where are you from, what's your blood. And if you have Jewish blood, you're a Jew. You could be a Jew who believes in the Christian God, who worships in a Christian church. They only care about what's racial. They only care about Jewish blood. And of course, in my book on Bonhoeffer, I talk about Bonhoeffer's best friend was ethnically Jewish, but he was ordained as a pastor. Of course, the Nazis don't care what you believe. They only care about, are you ethnically Jewish? And if you are their enemy. And so you're a boy growing up in this world. When did you first notice that something is going wrong? At what age were you?
I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. I can remember it that far back.
So, and what did you notice?
Well, my father worked for President Jochen in Austria.
Your father worked for the president of Austria. Holy cow.
Yes.
Wow. Tell me the name of the president of Austria at that time.
Jochen.
And this is before Dollfuss, is that right? No.
Yeah, well, that was just before the Anschluss, before Hitler walked into Austria and made Austria part of Germany.
And that was 38?
Yeah.
Okay, so my goodness, your father worked for the president of Austria. My goodness. And so I'm fascinated that at such a young age, if you were born in, I guess you were born in 32?
Yes, that's correct.
If you're born in 32, so when you say you're 5 years old, 1937, it was already getting dangerous, very dangerous in 1937. So what did you see in your life? And I know it's all in the book. The book is called My Two Lives. But what did you see as a child? How did your parents deal with this?
Well, I heard my father say that Hitler was going to come into Austria, take over Austria, so that he felt that to keep my brother and myself safe, we should go to Berlin, where my grandparents lived. And at that time, Berlin was evidently a little safer than being in Austria, where Hitler was walking in.
That's an unbelievable thing. I never would have guessed that. But of course, your father was in the most elite circles possible, so he would be in a position to know. So he sent you and your brother to Berlin to live with your grandparents.
That's correct.
And your grandparents were his parents?
No, were her parents. My mother was Jewish.
Yes.
He was Catholic.
So he sent you to live with your Jewish grandparents?
I lived with my Jewish grandparents, who were my mother's parents.
Okay, in Berlin. So what happens at this point? Obviously, he didn't know where this would take you, but what was your experience?
Well, we moved to Berlin as children, my brother and I, to live with our grandparents. And sure enough, Hitler moved, of course, into Austria, which they called the Anschluss. And my father and President Jochen, they were arrested, put on the same train, and they were both sent to a concentration camp, Sachsenhausen, which is exactly north of Berlin, just a few miles north of Berlin.
So Hitler put all his political enemies in concentration camps, so you didn't need to be Jewish. Your father was Catholic, and Schuschnigg, I don't believe, was Jewish.
Well, no, Schuschnigg was not Jewish.
Yeah.
He was a political enemy, just like my father was considered a political enemy. Now, what my father did and my mother, when we came to Berlin, they took us to a Catholic church and had my brother and myself baptized Catholic.
Yeah.
So whenever someone would ask us, what is your religion? What do you believe in? As little children, we would always say Catholic.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that saved us.
What was your story? In other words, here you are living in Berlin, you have Jewish grandparents, but you have been baptized into the Catholic Church, and you're saying that this was the wisdom of your father and grandparents to protect you and your brother.
Yes, that's correct. Now, what happened while we were living there, things were getting hotter and hotter in Berlin, and more people disappeared. Several of my grandparents and my relatives disappeared. My uncles disappeared. My aunts disappeared. My kids our age disappeared. So my grandfather happened to know a camp in northern Germany on the North Sea called, the place was called Dangast. That's a little village there. And this lady, Irma Franzen Heinrichsdorf, ran this camp for maybe 30, 40 children. And my grandfather sent us there. Now, this lady was not Jewish. She was very German. She had 2 children. And the 2 children were both members of the Hitler Youth. So she said, if you live here, I suggest, by the way, this lady knew that we were Jewish.
Folks, I hate to interrupt, but I just don't want you to miss any of the content we're putting out on here. We've just got some amazing stuff. So would you do yourself a favor and hit the subscribe button so we can make sure you don't miss anything? I promise you, great stuff coming up. Hit the subscribe button. Thank you.
So this lady suggested we join with her children, and the other children join the Hitler Youth.
Were you old enough at that time to be opposed to Hitler internally in your mind? Were you aware of those kinds of things? How old were you when you were put into the Hitler Youth?
Well, I was about 7 to 8 years old at that time. And yes, we were very much aware of what was going on from my father, from my parents, from my mother, from the lady at the camp, and all the other children at the camp were in the Hitler Youth. So why wouldn't we be in Hitler Youth? They would question that, probably, you know?
My mother is 89, so she's 2 years younger than you, and I know she missed the Hitler Jugend for girls by 1 year. She's always said that to me, that if she was 1 year older, she would have been put into that. But so you and your brother, is your brother older or younger?
He's a year and a half older.
A year and a half older than you. So you are enrolled as Jews in the Hitler Youth. And were you afraid to speak? It seems to me that it would be a very difficult situation.
Well, it was difficult. It was very hard. My brother and I used to talk about it all the time, what we should do and what's best for us. And it, 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 it was a terrible situation, but we had no choice. So we would act like all the other kids and be part of the Hitler Youth.
And you say that you saw many of your neighbors, your Jewish neighbors, suddenly disappearing.
Yes. And children that I knew overnight. The next day they were gone. It was terrible. And we didn't really know where they were going. And they told us, well, they were going east. So their parents had another job. That's what the children were being told. Now, when we came to Berlin and my father was arrested, my mother went to Czechoslovakia to be in exile there. And she lived in Prague for, I think it was about 2 years, somewhere around there, until Hitler also came into Czechoslovakia. And then, of course, there he handled the Jews the same way he handled them in Germany and everywhere else.
So I have to say, you lost both of your parents murdered by the Nazis.
Yes.
Yes. Did you know at the time where your parents were? So here you and your brother are boys, little boys. Did you have an idea of where they were and what was happening?
Well, yeah, I remember getting a letter or two from my mother. I knew that she was in Prague. I knew that my father was in a concentration camp in Berlin. That I knew.
What happened after this? In other words, you're in Nazi Germany. Your boys. Where did it go from there? I mean, as the war came, were you aware of where your parents were during the war?
Yes, there was a time my mother came back from Czechoslovakia, and she was very anxious to see us. And she called a lady at the camp, and she said, I want my boys to come to Berlin just for a short period of time. So we went back to Berlin to live with her in a separate apartment.
What year was that, Jack?
I was about 10 years old then.
So this is during the war, your mother, who's Jewish, dared to go to Berlin.
Yeah, come back to Berlin. Yeah.
That's absolutely extraordinary. So in the middle of the war, your mother felt that it was okay to go to Berlin. That's extraordinary to hear.
Yeah, she came back to Berlin and rented an apartment, and my brother and I went back to live with her for a short period of time. While we were there, we found out, and we were told, that my father and mother were still in contact through an SS officer at the camp. And what they were doing, they were exchanging letters. So my brother and I were on a mission one day to deliver a letter to this gentleman. Now, my mother told us exactly how to get there by subway. We had to transfer. And we met the gentleman who had a code word. We gave him the letter, and he gave us a letter.
This is unbelievable. Forgive me, we're going to another break. I'm talking to Jack Wurfl. It's Wurfl. Wurfl. The book is My Two Lives. This is all in the book. We'll be right back.
He gave us a letter. We took it back home. As we got out of the subway and turned the corner to go into our house, we noticed that there were a number of automobiles from the Gestapo and SS in front of our apartment house. We had an apartment there. And we decided, carrying this letter, we better wait here and see what our mother tells us when they leave. So we waited there in the corner and we watched all this. And to our surprise, they came out and with my mother, put my mother in one of the Gestapo cars and took her away. Uh, my brother and I, we took that letter. We thought we best destroy the letter at this point. We went back down in the subway station, tore it up into 1,000 pieces so that no one would find it. And that was the story with my mother, and she was now arrested. And it took my brother and myself about 3 days to find out where in Berlin my mother was imprisoned, in which prison. And we found that out. And as kids, we walked into the prison as if we owned the prison and ran around. And we found our mother at her cell. And we went into our mother and said, "Mother, here we are." And she said, "Boys, be good, go to school, learn as much as you can, always. You know I will always love you. You will always love me, but leave this prison now, because if you don't, you're going to end up where I am right now. You don't want to be here." So my brother and I ran out of the prison, and as we got to the front gates, finally some officer had suspicion that what are these boys doing here, and grabbed us, and we tore ourselves loose and ran out into the street. They ran after us, but as 10-year-olds, we could run a little faster than they could, and we disappeared, and they couldn't find us. Now, my mother, before all of this happened, my mother said, "If anything ever happens while you live with me here in Berlin, here is the name of an attorney. You call him, tell him what happened to me, and he will take care of you and tell you what to do." And he did, and he told us to go back immediately to Doncaster, to this lady, to this camp where we had lived before. And
So
that's what we did.
in 1942, you at 10 and your brother at 11 or 12 traveled by yourself to northern Germany to reunite with the woman who had been caring for you before your mother.
Yeah, that's correct. We went back by train.
This is unbelievable. This should be a movie, Jack. I think your family probably realizes this. What an extraordinary story to hear you telling this.
Wow.
It's absolutely amazing that at this age you experienced this.
Yes.
Well,
Yes, we did.
so you go back to this woman. What part of Germany was it again? Was it Pomerania? Where is it?
Well, it was called Doncaster, and it's in northern Germany. It's called Friesland.
In
And
Friesland.
it's right on the North Sea.
Okay.
Our camp was only 1 block from the beach.
Friesland. And so I imagine I know this area. And so what happened to you at this point? It's 1942. Your father is at Sachsenhausen. Your mother has been arrested by the Nazis. Were you in contact with them? Did you know what happened to them after that? When did you find out?
No. Found out a little later. In the meantime, we were still in the Hitler Youth. When we were 2 years above that, they were teaching us how to use simple weapons like hand grenades. We fired bazookas. We learned how to march. We had to learn how to say Heil Hitler, and so on. We went to school in this little village, and the teacher, luckily, who was also an SS officer, but taught us every day, he knew very well what we call Tante Irma Franzenheimelsdorf, the lady who ran the camp. And between the two of them, they knew who we were. And they every so often gave us advice. Now, we were in school every morning at 8 o'clock and learned the Hitler philosophy. We sang songs, German songs, about the danger of the Jews and kill the Jews and all these sort of things. And we had to sing along with everybody else. We had no choice, because if we didn't, that would be the end of us. So Now we had two friends in Dangast. The lady who ran the camp as well as our teacher.
I mean, the fact that the teacher was in the SS is unbelievable. In other words, the idea that you have a teacher who's in the SS, who knew that you were Jews, and that this teacher who was in the SS participated in protecting you. That's the kind of a story we don't often hear. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, he would teach us 8 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock noon, and then he would go change into his black uniform, get on his motorcycle, and take off for his SS meetings. We never knew where he was going, what they were doing, what he was doing, but he was always very good to us.
It is extraordinary that here you are being protected by somebody in the SS. And this is just a lesson for all of us that things are not what they seem. There are people who are members of wicked organizations, corporations, you name it, who may not be on board with the philosophy. They are on the inside trying to do something. Did you know what happened to this SS member later on in life?
Yes, he at the end of the war, he was arrested, of course, because he was SS. And about a year later, our Tante Irma, the lady who ran the camp, went to the prison camp and told them who this gentleman really was, that he was the teacher of the children there. He taught them, but he helped them, and they actually let him go out of prison much earlier than they normally would have.
So the Allies understood that this is not your typical SS member.